Now I'm pleased to say that we're going to hear from a lived experience leader who is driving change, who is connecting mental health and physical health through her advocacy. Shannon Harwood is a project lead with Equally Well. She's leading the development of what's called the Equally Well Lived Experience Advocacy Framework. And I guess that framework is really about empowering people to help get the Equally Well cause and mission and consensus statement in front of the power brokers, the policy makers, the keepers of the public purse, politicians. And that is a vital act in any movement. Shannon was a project coordinator at the Tasmanian Centre for Mental Health Innovation, a peer practitioner with Tasmanian Public Health Services. She is passionate in her advocacy for lifestyle and nutritional approaches to mental health care, for choice, and for the protection of human rights and dignity in mental health care. Please give a warm welcome to Shannon Harwood.
That's good, yeah. Good morning, Shannon Harwood, and relatively new Kings. Still got my L plate just a little, but attended a fabulous talk recently, and I was talking to the presenter afterwards, not about the topic, but about public speaking, and they said to me, Shannon, if you can use humour, that's really useful. And I thought, oh, yeesh. Because while they were saying that, I was mentally reviewing in my head my talk title for this morning, which was Learning of the Mortality Gap, from engagement to advocacy. And I'm not sure it is in that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, will this one cut in or I'm just on? Okay. Where was I? I know where I was. I was hoping that you'd bear with me as I give this talk this morning, because I wanted to talk about learning of the mortality gap that exists for people with mental health challenges and mental illness, because sometimes when people learn of this, their response to that is outrage or but none of these things were my emotional response to learning of that gap. And that would be lovely. I'm happy to use a hand mic. A hand mic's fine. Hello. Hello. 4.
We'll get it right. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Oh, love the sound of that. There you go.
So do I. So, what was I saying? I was saying that I wanted to talk about the moment I learned of diminished life expectancy for people experiencing mental health challenges and mental illness, because sometimes when people hear that, they hear it with a sense of anger or outrage or moral imperative. But these were not my emotions when I came across this learning. Now, this morning I was asked to talk from my personal lived experience, and I heard that introduction, but here today I'm just here as a person, my personal journey. So I'd like to give a small disclaimer, and this is that the language, the thoughts and the views that I expressed this morning are my own. They're not necessarily the views of organisations that I'm associated with, even Equally Well, Millet, the National Consumer Alliance. They are just my personal thoughts. as I went about. So, I'd like to tell you a story. Sometimes things happen that are of such importance that we remember where we were and what we were doing when they happened. So I don't know about you guys, but do you remember where you were when 9/11 took place? Yeah, so do I. So when that happened, it was reasonably late in the evening. I happened to be listening to the BBC World Service on the radio, and the news came in that the first plane had hit. And I didn't know exactly what had happened or why, and I didn't know what it meant. And as the hours unfolded, the second plane hit. And as those early morning hours unfolded, I had a sense that something in the world had shifted. Something had shifted in our collective sense of safety. Fear entered. Uncertainty entered. What did this mean for me? What did this mean for us? And somehow I felt that nothing was ever going to be the same again. Now, I remember where I was and what I was doing when I learnt about the diminished life expectancy. For people with bipolar disorder, that's more than 20 years. I had bipolar disorder. So there I was sitting in my living room. It was a cold morning, an autumn morning. I was sitting in front of the fire. I was sitting in front of the fire. Outside it was kind of like an overcast, cloudy day, and a weak autumn sunlight kind of struggled through the windows. My children were playing in the next room. And that morning, as I opened up my laptop, I read this sentence. For people with bipolar disorder, statistically, there is a 20-year reduction in life expectancy. And as I read that sentence, for me, something in my world shifted. Fear entered. And a sense of uncertainty. What did this mean for me? And somehow I felt that nothing was ever going to be the same again. But the thought that flashed, you know what? I'd like to say at that moment that when I learnt that the sky darkened, that the light dimmed, and that a rain and clouds came up around the house. But you know what? None of that happened. The world continued on oblivious. Everything continued on exactly the same. My children still played in the next room. But the thought that flashed through my head was, will my children's children have a grandmother? Will I get to be a grandmother? And so I read more, because what was the cause? And I found that the overwhelming cause was poor physical health, diabetes, obesity, heart attack, cancer. Not bipolar per se. Although the pharmacological treatments used to treat bipolar and their adverse experiential side effects, as well as their clinically measurable metabolic and other side effects, certainly contribute to that statistic. Now, I've come to think over time, that there are three main responses to this mortality gap. Some people are oblivious. Some people are not oblivious. They're aware, but they turn a blind eye. And then there are others, like those of us in this room, who are trying to create change. Now, I don't know if my own psychiatrist at that time was oblivious or aware. All I know was that they certainly didn't discuss it with me. My physical health was not addressed. Lifestyle interventions were also not meaningfully discussed or supported. The sum total, I was told, was pretty much good sleep and a healthy diet are important. And so I began to ask myself, right, at the level of practical engagement, why is it that people turn a blind eye? And at a systems level, how is it that we've known of this mortality gap for decades and yet it continues on? Well, during my time with mental health service providers, I became aware of a pervasive message of chronic hopelessness. Poor outcomes seemed expected. Do people turn a blind eye because it all seems too hard and somehow anyway inevitable? Or do providers in the mental health system turn a blind eye because they don't see that this problem is their problem? I mean, psychiatrists deal with mental illness, but it's nephrologists who deal with kidney disease and endocrinologists that deal with diabetes. What business is whose business? Me? Well, I don't have that luxury of separation. I can't take my head off and put my mind and brain over there, my kidneys over here, and my blood sugar down there. And even if I could, would I? Would I pretend that my body is not a sophisticated, fully integrated system? Would I pretend that I'm actually just a collection of organs held together in one skin sac? And even if I did want to pretend, it would be ignoring what I was beginning to learn. Because I was beginning to learn that my physical health was not only measured in physical health outcomes, that my physical health could actually be measured in positive mental health outcomes. Physical health and mental health are entwined. So I learned that at times medications for me were useful for symptoms, relief from symptoms, but I also learned that physical health and lifestyle interventions allowed me underlying management of bipolar disorder. And in my reading and in the lifestyle interventions I engaged with, I explored the role of inflammation, of circadian rhythm, of light therapy, of diet, of stress, of sleep. My last substantial physical health intervention was a dietary intervention, and it was me looking for a radical new way of healing. I adopted a ketogenic diet, having heard of its use in treatment of serious mental illness, bipolar and schizophrenia. And this intervention, the keto diet, brought me genuine healing. After 33 years of unremitting bipolar disorder, I have been in complete remission for almost 5 years. But, perhaps this is not so very radical. I mean, after all, ketogenic diets have been used in epilepsy for 100 years, and epilepsy medications and treatments are routinely used for bipolar disorder. And I came to think to myself, as I did all of these things, that when we think about what we want to engage with, whether it be medication or physical health and lifestyle interventions, the right belongs with the individual to make their decisions based on risks, weighing up risks and potential benefits. So therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, TCR as it's called, is known as a lifestyle intervention. As I pursued, all of this, I asked myself one question, just one. I asked myself, how good can I get it? I refused to take on board that I was a hopeless case, that somehow the SMI, serious mental illness category that was attributed to me predetermined my outcomes. No, I asked, how good can I get it? And I came to learn for mental health populations at risk of poor physical health outcomes that physical health and lifestyle interventions serve many purposes. Prevention, management, treatment, or adjunct care for populations at risk. I was at risk. When I opened up my laptop on that autumn morning, my personal risk came to me as a bald statistic. But I did not turn a blind eye. I engaged. I engaged on a journey of discovery, self-growth, implementation, and eventually advocacy. But there is no advocacy without hope. There is no advocacy if one is unable to imagine possibilities that do not yet exist. And so as I asked myself, how good could I get it? I was imagining for myself a future that was different from my present circumstances. And then, as I became well, I began to look further afield. I began to look beyond my personal circumstances towards the entire system of mental health care. A journey of personal engagement had become a journey of systemic advocacy. And again I asked, how good can I get it? And then I imagined. And then I said to myself, I have a dream. And you've got to wonder at this stage, am I actually a megalomaniac? Do I, Shannon Harwood, think I can single-handedly throw myself at the entire mental health system and somehow change the world? But, that speech of Martin Luther King's was the I Had a Dream speech, was galvanising because it ignited a sense of possibilities. It was a refusal, an outright refusal to accept current actualities. And for each of us here now, how we all engage with imaginable possibilities will be different because we all work in different spaces. I mean, this is the beauty of the Equally Well network. It connects so many people across so many networks in advocacy, in practical initiatives, hands-on, ones-to-one work, service design, service commissioning, and people like me. People who have lived what is and call for what could be. Now, we know that it's not enough just to know and continue on with practices unchanged. It is self-evident that this mortality gap has existed side by side with the current system. And so it is self-evident that this statistic is going to change, then that is going to involve a system change. But how do systems change? Well, I think systems change through cultural change. But how does culture change, Shannon? Well, I think culture changes through many mechanisms. I think it changes from the grassroots, bottom up. I think it changes from research, top down. I think it changes in the middle ground. Dedicated practitioners leading by example. And I also think that it changes through the use of frameworks and guidelines that guide best practice. Last week, I happened to be reading the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists guidelines for clinical practice guidelines for mood disorders. I know, right? Don't judge me. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon. So, I can tell you that within those guidelines there are 61 pages that relate to the treatment, management and maintenance of mood disorders. Further, I can tell you that these are helpfully laid out as first actions and then choices and alternatives. And within those first actions, since psychological interventions and lifestyle interventions. So, for example, for bipolar depression or mixed state, first line of actions, diet, regular exercise, sleep. Even for mania, one of the first lines of actions there is sleep hygiene. And I thought, well, this is good. This is good. First line of actions, this is genuinely acknowledgement of the importance of physical health and lifestyle acknowledged for their importance. And as a guide to clinicians within these 61 pages, the guidelines provide 8 single-line dot points relating to diet based on the Healthy Australian Dietary Guidelines. There are 9 single-line dot points relating to exercise and a recommendation for people to go to a website. There are 6 single-line dot points relating to sleep and the suggestion to refer patients to a website. But it does say this. It says, some actions can be instituted largely by the patient, such as lifestyle changes, for example, regular exercise, diet and sleep hygiene. But I'm not sure that that's always true. And further, I wondered to myself, if I was a physician, whether reading the sum total of 23 single-line dot points, whether I would feel myself fully equipped to put into place the first line of action interventions for treatment, management and maintenance. And when I read these guidelines, I thought to myself, we really need to give these guys better tools and more tools in their toolbox. Now, I was fortunate because, if I had actually been sent to those websites, I probably would have learned a great deal. I am fortunate because I have high literacy. I am fortunate because I'm able to research. I am fortunate because I developed my sense of agency. I am fortunate. And I shrugged off the messaging of chronic hopelessness. I was fortunate indeed. But I'm not so sure that everybody is so fortunate. Health equity is not about the universal availability of things, services, information, websites, screenings. Health equity is about giving support to the people who need it so they are able to access and engage and benefit from these things. If I dream, if I imagine, then I imagine a culture that gives real weight to physical health and wellness, not tokenism. I imagine an Australian mental health sector that has equipped its services and its workforce with the depth of knowledge needed and the skills, the practical coaching skills, the skills that are needed to guide and support people engaging with these foundational physical health and lifestyle strategies. I imagine the practical fruition of the principles that are already laid out in guidelines, the principles that are already understood. I imagine that in the future we can do better than in the past. Later this morning we'll have a conversation about equally well in practice, and we shall hear from the panellists about how good are we getting it. And I love this question. How good can I get it? How good can we get it? How good can we get it?
Check, 1, 2, there we are. Oh, stay on stage. Don't go. No, we're going to do some questions.
Are we?
Shall we?
Are we?
Yeah, let's. Yeah, come on back for a few minutes.
All right.
What do you think? I think a couple of questions. You can either send them via the WhatsApp group, which I've got here on a tablet, or you can come up. Oh, we'll get a mic to you. I've got a mic and I'll come to you. Any thoughts or questions? Have we got a hand up? Any responses, any points of resonance? Or are you still warming up? Still getting lubricated? Yes, great. I'll just get a mic to you. Yeah, I'll hold it, that's fine.
Oh, hey, thanks, Shannon. That was really great. And there was some jokes in there. Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, great, amazing speech, and thank you so much. And what resonated with me was when you read that article last Sunday and those 21 single points. I mean, yeah, it's a start, but most of these, I guess, doctors, psychiatrists, etc., that are going to read this, they don't have all that background skill about what to do with those active and maintenance hyped up points. So I think that's a starting place for psychiatry and the medical profession to start to educate and to teach in that space. So thank you for raising that, because it's important as well that there is education out there.
Yeah, I mean, I did an enormous amount of education for myself. As I said, I was really fortunate. I read and I read and I read and I read. The amount of reading I did on circadian rhythm and sleep hygiene is more than a glass of milk, turn off the blue light screens and set an alarm clock. I mean, there was an enormous amount to that learning and then actually putting it into place. Yeah.
We've got a question here.
Thank you, Shannon. Hi. You raised the issue of health equity and you know, you talked about your privilege and that's my lived experience. We've got shared diagnosis, and one of the things I keep thinking about is how do we practically embed equity in the practices and policies? Because you're right, you know, there are so many people who don't have the information or don't have the literacy or whatever, the resources or whatever.
You know, I went to a conference recently, the National Low Carb Conference, and I met with the New Zealand and Australian Board of Registered Coaches. And they were talking to a room that was probably about 80% clinicians, strong interest in diabetes management, which, you know, for this mental health population, 5 times the rate. But it wasn't a mental health conference. But the woman from the coaching organisation asked the room, said, how many clinicians here have actually done training in coaching? And only a couple had. And she was talking about, we'll do it because it's going to change your practice. So, you know, not just motivationally interviewing, because like the sum total, seriously, of what I was told was that good sleep and a healthy diet are important. Well, you know, giving someone a blank piece of information like that is not support. So I think, to answer your question, Giancarlo, you know, I think some of the education and curriculum coming down with things like coaching skills, and exactly how would you coach someone through a sleep program? I mean, it took me 3 years tracking, and I learnt a great deal through that tracking. How do you coach someone through a dietary program? If it was just as easy to say, well, get a good sleep and eat healthy, well, you know, the job would be done, wouldn't it?
And great insight, says Jack, on the WhatsApp group. I think a big part of the issue with education is that we only really have capacity to see patients when they're in crisis. This is not a time for education for obvious reasons. I'd like to see more, quote unquote, well patient person clinical input. So when people are well and not in the thick of a crisis.
That would be fantastic. I mean, some of this stuff is not the acute crisis care point, but I must make the point that what happened to me happened over 12 years, and I wasn't in crisis for 12 years. These things were unengaged with for 12 years across multiple providers. And I know we've got Ben Wells from NEMI coming up to talk into the panel too about, obviously, not those moments in crisis, and I think that he will have more information about that than I have. Yeah.
Question.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. For me, what resonates is when you said, if I'm an educated person and I have access to this and this and this, and it's taking me so long to understand. And as you can tell by my accent, English is not my first language. And I really want to say thank you, because we need to think about those people who cannot access the information. So if it's difficult for us, who can access the information and who can articulate in English, imagine all the people who are really feeling isolated. They have these mental issues, and they do not know how to start, where to access the information, because there is also the second barrier, which is the language and the culture. So
And
thank you for that.
Thank you. And even beyond, English and general literacy, I remember the first time I started reading in the medical journals. I remember very vividly the first medical journal article I read, and it was difficult. These days I do it all the time, but there's literacy and there's literacy. And would I have received any of that information about working with circadian rhythms? Well, I wasn't getting in service. That's where that came from. That came from the medical journals directly. So, there's a lot. There's a lot of information that we could share in lots of different ways.
These are great questions coming in. Amrita on the WhatsApp. Thank you, Shannon, for sharing your journey. Can you share how you have engaged in conversations with those in the health system about pursuing a different way of seeking optimal health, mental and physical, for yourself, pursuing as good as it can get rather than just good enough?
Well, I mean, I haven't worked at the level of policy development in health systems, so this one was this one would go back to my own peer practice, where I worked with people on, how good we can get it, because most of my first peer practice was trying to remove a sense of brokenness, inevitability, chronic hopelessness, and once you got through that, then you could start to engage with how good can I get it. And I used to say to people, I can give you 100 things that you can try, and you probably won't want to try most of them, so let's start with anything take your fancy. And just start, because for me it didn't really matter what strategy I put in place first, because whatever strategy I put in place first that had some success was teaching me about agency, and it was teaching me that I had control and some management possibilities over what was happening to me. So that could be a morning where it could be anything. It doesn't matter what strategy it is. Just something to develop that agency. And then people blossom and go off and experiment and explore, as I experimented and explored.
Yeah, agency. Yeah.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you for being so courageous and sharing your personal experience. I know it's not an easy thing to do at times. You mentioned one of those moments that will stay with you forever, and you'll remember it, is when you read those words. And I must say that this will be one of those experiences that I will remember, because it dawned on me that my dad, who had bipolar, passed away just before he was 60, and all of a sudden I could see all the connections that led up to that, and the connection to the physical and mental health. But my question to you is, in your advocacy, I imagine you face many challenges, roadblocks. What are some of your strategies when you hit that to look after yourself in the self-care aspect, and B, different avenues that you may take instead?
So the self-care aspect is really simple, and it's this: I connect with my lived experience tribe. I could not do what I'm doing without being debriefed and supported by others in the lived experience community. And in terms of doing advocacy, what I've learned is that for someone who doesn't possess a degree, for someone who has a diagnostic label, SMI, serious mental illness, that my voice, my thoughts, my insights, even the fact my healing journey are dismissed, ignored, diminished or sidelined. And so what I've learned to do over the years, and this is part of what's extended me in my reading, is I've learned to use other people. I'm very keen on quoting the BMJ or the Lancet, and for people in this room and the advocacy project I'm working on with Equally Well, I'm really keen for people to use Equally Well and their position statements in the work that they do. I would like to think that my voice alone is enough, but I know that when people see me, they categorise me unskilled, unqualified, mentally ill. And from that point, it can be really difficult to get a start and being heard in a conversation. So I reference heavily.
We'll take one final question. Thank you.
Hi Shannon, Julian here. I'm a peer worker from up in Queensland. I'm involved with the multi-mobility quality improvement schemes, cascades of care. One of the things we're doing at the moment is nutrition. We'll be wrapping up new things. But in amongst that is when we're doing the brief intervention, what that's going to look like is that when you talk about literacy, even for clinicians, is that we have to provide literacy to them in a fashion that they're actually going to use it. Because all too often, as you were talking about, all those bullet points and everything like that, it just gets lost. It's not actually quality information. It's not necessarily incorrect information. But we need to be able to provide the information in a useful manner that's going to be able to be engaged in service delivery to people in a meaningful way, in a person-centred fashion. So I think that aspect of advocacy is super important, because we can provide a wealth of information, but if they're not going to use it, what's the point?
Yeah. And I used to do some lived experience health coaching with people around dietary choices and coaching, right? And so it's a bit like the other thing, really, is doesn't have to be done all at once. And I really invite people, if they're going to do any change, whether it's a medication change, a lifestyle change, a diet change, whatever, if you're going to try something new, then track whether it was useful. So for me, one of the things, like coffee put me in hospital once, so I tracked my caffeine. And I tracked the outcomes of using caffeine. It was only one small dietary change, but again, because I tracked it and saw positive outcomes, it was actually, the idea of suddenly adopting an entirely healthy diet, that's a bit overwhelming. But would I feel better if I stopped sucking back Coca-Cola and caffeine all day? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but you've got to go through that to realise it, don't you? And go through the withdrawal symptoms and the headaches. And just some comments, and great to see you using the WhatsApp group so effectively, and I encourage the people on the live stream to do that too. But points that resonate. Michael Pascoe has written, can we believe GPs will not overshadow or discriminate against people with AOD/mental health and actually see the person in front of them and their physical ailments and illnesses? And Andrew has added, Andrew Knight, what was your experience of GPs in your journey? Sorry, GPs in the room, but this is the truth you need to hear, I guess, in some cases.
Short answer to that question is no. No, you cannot trust that will happen. I'll give you a really quick story if we've got this. And not only is diagnostic overshadowing for a person, I found out it's cross-generational. So my 14-year-old had stomach cramps, in extreme pain, crying all night. She's got a high pain tolerance. This was incredibly unusual. I wondered to myself if she had acute constipation, but I did also wonder whether it was appendicitis. So I took her to the GP so they could do an examination, because I'm not really quite sure where the appendix is, right? And they did the examination and it's not appendicitis, so that was great, right? But then the GP is sitting down with me, and she has no idea what it is that I've shared with my daughter about my own mental health. And the GP is sitting with me and she literally says this. She looks at my 14-year-old daughter and she says, now you're mothers. Are you sure you're not,
Wow.
Now, if she'd want to engage with psychosomatic presentations of stomach pain and ask my daughter whether she was enduring stress, anxiety or difficulties, fair enough, but I kid you not, that was the gesture she used. So not only, and the fear that's been engendered in my children, because I have this diagnosis, it's extraordinary. It is extraordinary. So, but when we talk about an entire system and an entire culture, we're not talking about every single GP here. So,
Yeah. Shannon Harwood, okay, why did you even give the disclaimer at the top to say that you've not experienced at public speaking? It's all lies, I tell you.
Because I knocked my water drink over, I couldn't get the
Well,
right.
that's because we haven't got a table for you and the tech didn't work. No offence, the tech did work in the end, and we're grateful to the tech team for keeping us going today. Please give it up for Shannon Harwood.
Thank you.